You lie back, close your eyes and drift gently into the slow grey hum of the North Sea. There is no storm here, just the dull, rhythmic creaking of a longship, the lapping of cold waves against the hull, and the smell of salt and fish oil soaked into wool. You are aboard a Viking ship somewhere in the 9th century, not for war, not for discovery, just for the long, steady journey between one coast and another. And here, as the wind picks up, your stomach reminds you it is time to eat. But what did a Viking eat, surrounded by nothing but ocean, soaked sails and rotting ropes? The answer begins with preparation, back on land before the voyage. Viking food wasn't thrown together last minute. For long sea journeys, careful planning was essential. Bread wouldn't survive, milk would sour, and fresh fish could only be caught if the sea behaved. So preservation was king. Fish was salted, endlessly, thoroughly, often to the point that it no longer tasted like fish. The preservation wasn't elegant or tasty. It was about survival. Salted cod or herring would be dried, then packed into barrels. These barrels were sealed with tar or pitch, not to be opened until days or weeks into the voyage. With the fish came hardtack, or sea biscuit, called skorpa in Old Norse. These were dense, rock-hard lumps of baked barley or rye flour, with little flavor and less joy. The Vikings didn't pretend they were tasty. They were simply durable. You could drop one, use it as a hammer, and still eat it later. They were soaked in water, ale, or broth, anything to soften them enough to chew. Sometimes mold grew on. Them and sailors would scrape it off. Food waste was not a concept these seafarers could afford. Water? Rare. Ale and mead were safer, if only because the fermentation killed some bacteria. Casks of weak ale were loaded on ships in advance. By today's standards, they were barely alcoholic, but they were wet, and they wouldn't kill you. If you drank too much seawater, that very well might. And yet some of the most interesting food on these voyages wasn't fish at all. Vikings, particularly those of higher status, packed dried meats, horse or lamb, smoked or salted. Occasionally, cheese made from sheep or goat milk, rarely pickled vegetables. On wealthier ships, a few apples or onions. But these wouldn't last more than a few days. After that, it was back to the salted and dried. In the coldest months, fat was currency. Fat meant survival. One of the most reviled yet life-saving ingredients was whale blubber, or even worse, a paste made from it, mixed with grains or dried seaweed. This concoction, thick and oily, was a calorie bomb meant to fight the cold. Its texture was foul. Its taste lingered. But it could keep a sailor alive another day, another night. And all this had to be eaten in rough conditions. There were no tables aboard Viking ships. Sailors ate seated on barrels, hunched over, one hand gripping the boat as it lurched. Meals were cold, rushed, and communal. Wooden bowls passed around, sometimes shared. Hygiene? It didn't exist in the way we know. Hands rinsed in seawater, if at all. There were no utensils for many, just fingers, teeth, and a sharp dagger. But still, meals mattered. Even these basic, repetitive rations were moments of pause. In between rowing shifts, steering, bailing water, or shivering in silence, eating was a task with rhythm and routine. It gave shape to the day. It filled the silence, and sometimes a traveler would bring out a bit of honey or a dried berry, stashed in cloth, and share it. Tiny pleasures in a grey world. The Vikings were practical, not sentimental, but that didn't mean they lacked ritual. On certain voyages, a bit of the first catch or ration was dropped into the sea, an offering to Aegir, the sea god. It was more habit than belief, more tradition than prayer, but it still mattered. The sea could be cruel. Hand food was too precious to risk tempting the waves. Even more fascinating are the items archaeologists have uncovered from ship burial sites like the Oseberg and Gokstad ships in Norway. Alongside weapons and tools, they found remnants of preserved foods, piles of hazelnuts, grains, even evidence of butter stored in wooden barrels. These were not just combat ships. They were lifelines of daily life, supply, and sustenance. It's easy to imagine Vikings as warriors only, but they were also planners, preservers, and relentless survivors. A voyage could last days or weeks, and the ability to manage food, meant the difference between arriving and being lost to the sea. And yet one wonders, with all this preparation, what happened when the food ran out early, or when storms drenched the stores and rot set in? What did the Vikings do when hunger arrived before land? The sea is not a generous host. When the sky closed in and the wind stiffened, when the sails flapped violently or the oarsmen had to push through a storm for days on end, the carefully preserved barrels could become a source of dread rather than relief. Leaks could flood the stores, salt could lose its power, and rot crept in like a silent thief. You're still on that longship. Now the salted cod has started to smell slightly off. Sour, damp. The hardtack has gone from simply hard to nearly inedible. The mold not just scraped off, but spreading too fast to keep up. A wet cask leaks weak ale into the bilge water, and someone thinks they saw a worm in the flour sack. The voyage, which began with careful order, now teeters on discomfort and decay. But food, no matter how spoiled, could not be wasted. Vikings were not strangers to improvisation. When things began to go bad, literally, they adapted. Fish that had spoiled slightly could be boiled, doused in more salt, or smoked again over a fire built precariously in a makeshift hearthstone near the stern. It wasn't safe, but it was better than starvation. And better still than eating nothing while rowing 12 hours straight. Occasionally, sailors would throw in dried seaweed or bits of bone for flavor, if you could call it that. Bones were boiled for hours, sometimes days, in a watery broth, leaching out what little nutrition remained. The result was a thin grey soup with bits of flaked fish, seaweed, and the occasional grub. Sailors called it by different names, but in essence it was seasick stew. The taste was somewhere between damp rope and mud. But again, calories were calories. Some ships carried fermenting barrels, not of beer, but of sour milk or fermented fish paste, similar to modern-day surströmming in Sweden. The odor was indescribable, strong enough to clear a deck, but it lasted. That was the point. Fermentation preserved the food longer than simple drying or salting ever could. Of course, one had to be brave enough to eat it, and when nothing else worked, there was bone marrow. This was not the delicacy we imagine today served in modern kitchens. This was survival marrow, cracked open with stones or the butt of a knife, sucked dry in moments. On ships with livestock, rare but not impossible, Vikings might kill a sheep and eat every part of it. Hooves were boiled, organs were preserved, in ash or sea salt. The head would be split, roasted, and consumed fully. But more often than not, there were no animals aboard. Meat had to be carried, cured, and stored. So the fallback, when all else failed, was desperation. One recorded tale from an Icelandic saga recounts how a crew stranded at sea longer than expected resorted to grinding fish bones into powder, mixing it with whale oil, and forming it into cakes. These cakes were as dry as sand and smelled of rancid oil. They required water to swallow, which they didn't have. So sailors chewed and chewed until their jaws ached, swallowing little more than paste. The social dynamics aboard a ship worsened with hunger. Rations became strict, monitored. The ship's leader, often a styrmander or navigator, had authority over distribution. But arguments broke out. Food became both sustenance and power. Those who had saved a scrap of dried apple from the first week now held treasure. Others offered small carvings, pieces of jewelry or blades in exchange for a bite of cheese or even the last drop of honey mead. Sickness, too, was never far. Without vitamin C, scurvy crept in over weeks. Gums swelled, teeth loosened. A sailor might wake to find blood in his mouth and his legs stiff and purple. They didn't know the cause, only that something invisible took hold on long journeys. One solution, whether effective or not, was seaweed. It wasn't pleasant, but it was gathered when near shorelines or floating masses, sometimes boiled, sometimes chewed raw. It may have been the difference between death and survival. It is easy to romanticize Viking voyages, the adventure, the bravery, the myth of fierce explorers. But the reality was a slow, aching endurance. The food was rarely hot. The meals were not shared in song but in silence or with occasional muttered complaints. Yet even here, in this grey and repetitive suffering, there were tiny rituals. Before a meal, a short verse might be spoken, not always a prayer, but something closer to thanks. Thanks to the sea for not taking them. Thanks to the animals whose bodies now sustained them. Thanks even for the moldy biscuit, which, if nothing else, meant one more day alive. There was also a form of honor in going without. Some Viking leaders chose to skip meals when food ran low, giving more to their men. Others insisted on sharing everything evenly, keeping morale high. Of course, not all were noble. Some hoarded, and mutiny was not unheard of when hunger made tempers flare. And what of cooking fires? On most Viking ships, meats were boiled in large pots, grains simmered into porridge, and stones heated to bake flatbreads. These moments were relief, but brief. The next day, it was back to cold rations. As voyages lengthened, creativity became critical. Leather might be boiled for broth. Leftover animal sinew could be roasted. Even lichen scraped from wood was chewed when absolutely necessary. But what happened if the journey went far longer than planned? If fog rolled in, winds died, or they were pushed off course? What did the Vikings do when the food was truly gone, and the sea offered no fish, no island, no rescue? What did they eat then? The sea is quiet now, so quiet that it feels as if the ocean has stopped breathing altogether. No wind in the sail, no fish in the nets, no food in the barrels. This is the worst kind of silence aboard a Viking ship. Not the silence of sleep or routine, but of waiting. Waiting for rescue, or land, or the end. And still, despite the creaking, wood, the dry mouths, the cramping bellies, life goes on. Because the Vikings were not new to hardship. And when all known food ran out, they turned to what little remained. Belief, desperation, and ancient knowledge passed by word of mouth, rather than carved in stone. First, the final rations. Every longship carried what was sometimes called the sister fat, the last bowl. It was a mix of all remaining scraps, hardened bits of fish skin, powdered marrow, stale sea biscuit crumbs, whale blubber shavings, and sometimes even animal. Sinew. It was stewed with seawater and anything else salvaged from the voyage. The texture, sludgy, the smell, sour, the taste, irrelevant. The point was only this: keep going. There are sagas that speak of chewing on leather straps, softening boots over hot stones to make them edible. Some even soaked their wool cloaks in fish broth to suck out any remaining salt or fat, any trick, to cheat starvation. One desperate crew in an early Icelandic tale is said to have eaten their own wooden shield edges, carved with animal fat rubbed into them weeks before. It's hard to confirm the truth of this story, but it captures the core of Viking survival. Nothing was wasted. Still, hunger changed the mind as well as the body. Sailors began to hallucinate. They saw fires in the sea, trees on the horizon that weren't there, or fish leaping from waters that held none. These illusions became part of Viking lore, proof that the sea was not just a body of water, but a living force. At this point, many turned to the gods. Aegir, the sea giant, was both feared and respected. In moments of severe hunger, some sailors made symbolic sacrifices: a blade, a pendant, or even a drop of their own blood dropped into the waves. If no one could help them, maybe Aegir would. Or perhaps Njörður, the god of sea voyages and fishing, could be coaxed into compassion. There were murmured prayers, not spoken aloud like the Christian chants that would arrive in later centuries, but whispered like secrets into the wind, and there were songs, soft, slow, often just humming when voices were too weak. These songs were not for cheer. They were tools, rhythms to distract from pain. Some repeated childhood lullabies, others recited old recipes aloud, as if remembering food could conjure it. Yet not every voyage ended in return. Shipwrecks were common. So were silent disappearances. Some crews simply vanished, lost to a combination of wind, sea, and starvation. Sometimes wreckage washed ashore. A broken hull, a sealed, empty barrel, no sign of life, just cold, clean nothingness. But when a crew did return, even barely, they became local legends. One old Norse poem speaks of a man who lived 15 days on seaweed and fish eyes alone. Another of a woman who used fermented sheep's milk to nurse her dying husband back to strength aboard a drifting cargo ship. Whether these stories are true or not, they formed part of Viking identity. resilient, practical, and impossible to crush. In more mundane but no less astonishing terms, archaeologists have found ship remnants containing cracked bones, flattened, barley seeds, dried berry skins, and even tiny combs, perhaps used not for grooming but for scraping mold from food. These artifacts are reminders that Viking voyages were not swift or glorious. They were long, cold, and defined by routine rationing and the will to persist. But perhaps the most telling legacy of Viking seafood survival isn't in what they ate, but how they planned. No voyage was undertaken lightly. Before a ship set sail, meticulous inventories were taken. Food was counted not by days, but by oar shifts, by rowing cycles, by men per hour. Captains knew how long a man could survive on half rations, how to portion out honey as both morale booster and medical salve, how to store meat in wool-lined crates with dry salt to reduce spoilage. Even the shape of the ship reflected food priorities. Storage areas were built into benches and under planks. Compartments were separated with tarred seals to prevent water intrusion. Leather bags were sewn to hang from ceilings like ancient lunchboxes, swinging with the waves, always close at. The Viking food system was not glamorous, but it worked. And it allowed them to explore as far as Iceland, Greenland, and the edge of North America, long before anyone else had dared such distances in such ships. Their nutrition may have been poor by modern standards, but their logistics were exceptional. So what did the Vikings really eat at sea? They ate what lasted. What could be dried, smoked, salted, soured, or chewed after a week in a damp crate. They ate what kept them moving, even when the wind did not. They ate the bones, the skins, the seaweed, the scraps. And when that was gone, they chewed leather and whispered old recipes, trusting that the gods or at least the tides might bring them home. It's strange, in a way, to think that the survival of some of the fiercest warriors in history depended not on strength or swordplay, but on how well they packed their dried fish and moldy biscuits. Let's leave the cold wind of the North Sea now and step into something drier, though perhaps no less uncomfortable. You are sitting inside a dim, creaking chamber of stone and wood. It smells like old sheep hide, ink, damp wool, and dust. The light comes from a narrow slit window, barely enough to read by, but still, you read, because you are the tax collector, and these ledgers do not fill themselves. The year is 1326. The village is nameless, like most were back then. It exists as a dot on a lord's map and a line in a bailiff's scroll. But for the people who live here, tenants, freemen, villains, it is everything. Every field, every thatch of roof, every piglet born in spring matters. And you, the collector, are the one who will write it all down and take your share. But don't imagine an accountant's luxury. You have no desk. Your ink is made from soot, vinegar, and crushed oak galls. The quill you use was plucked from a goose weeks ago, sharpened with a knife you also use to slice bread. Your ledger is not a book, but a scroll of rough parchment, prepared, animal skin that still smells faintly of cow. It begins like this: 3 hens from Widow Marjorie for use of the mill, 1 full pig from John of Ashcombe for unpaid grazing fine, 2 bushels of barley, in lieu of coin, from Geoffrey, son of the tanner. There is no paper money. Coins are rare and inconsistent, some silver, some tin, some forged. So you take your tax in kind, in eggs, in wool, in broken tools, in the memory of debt. And you write it down, slowly, carefully, because if you lose track, someone will say they paid, and you won't be able to prove they didn't. The life of a medieval tax collector was far less feared than modern myths suggest. You were not rich, not powerful. You were tolerated, necessary, but never loved. Villagers nodded politely, kept their distance. Children were told to hush when you passed. Some whispered that your ink could bleed curses. Others thought you made pacts with the local monks to spy on their sins. Still, you worked. You began your day with the bell from the manor house. You walked from homestead to homestead, speaking with stewards, measuring fields with a rope, checking if livestock had grown since your last visit. You carried a wax tablet in your cloak, used for notes. Before permanent records were made. You wore thick boots. Mud was everywhere, and taxes back then were more than a sum. They were seasonal, tied to ancient customs. There was the heriot, a death duty. When a peasant died, his family paid the lord with his best animal. You noted it. There was tallage, an arbitrary tax demanded by the lord to fund wars, repairs, or his own vanity. You recorded it. There was boon work, free labor owed during harvest. You didn't write that down. You just watched and remembered who showed up late. And then came the feudal dues, rent for land, for oxen, for water rights, rent for the use of the communal oven, or the lord's wine press, or his ferry. It added up, slowly, quietly. You wrote these figures into columns. Sometimes the ink ran. Sometimes your fingers cracked. In winter you wrote with gloves on, gripping the quill like a knife. Sometimes you didn't write at all, just listened, and memorized until firelight allowed. You to sit and scribe, but more than numbers, your job was one of quiet observation. You noticed which families fed guests and which could barely feed themselves, who had a new roof, who patched theirs with bracken, who wore leather shoes, who had only straw sandals, who hid their pigs behind the haystack and claimed they'd lost them to wolves. You had to know, even if you said nothing. Because later, when the reeve asked for totals, or when the steward demanded more for the granary, it was your knowledge, not your ink, that mattered most. Once a month you visited the manor. You walked up the hill in your patched cloak, clutching your scrolls, boots soaked from the fields. You waited at the back door. A clerk let you in. You weren't offered wine, just a place at the side table. There you read your notes aloud to a bored young scribe in finer clothes who copied them into a larger book, often mishearing, often skipping the bits that didn't seem important. You corrected him where you could. He sneered. And still, you continued, not for wealth, but because this was the job your uncle had taught you and his father before him, because someone had to account for the land. Because without record, the village slipped into chaos, disputes and violence. But sometimes, just sometimes, you wondered, who recorded your debts? Who watched what you ate or what your family could afford? Was someone somewhere writing your name in a ledger? And if they were, what would your line say? 1 man, 34 winters, no land, 2 boots, ink-stained fingers, knows the truth of every pig in town. It is early spring now, and the mud in the village is thicker than porridge. You trudge through it. Daily, past the smithy where iron is pounded like thunder, past the bakehouse where smoke curls into a low sky. You pass sheep nibbling at the fence lines, a dog tied with rope too short for running, and the silent stares of villagers who know exactly why you're there. You are not here for trouble, just figures, always figures. But you know by now that numbers are never just numbers. Take the barley owed by old Geoffrey. You wrote it down, 2 bushels, you accepted it at the granary, weighed it, stored it, but you also noticed it was lighter than usual. Not spoiled, just less full. As if someone had taken a scoop before it reached your scale. You don't accuse him, you simply note it, mentally, not in ink. You mark who helps others during the harvest and who doesn't. You know who lends tools, who borrows too often, who lets their fence sag so a neighbor's pigs wander in, because taxation in this time is not only about grain and hens, it's also about relationships, social balance, and when coin is rare and time is the real currency, knowing who pulls their weight is more useful than knowing who owns what. The local reeve, a man named Edric, asks you for a list of those who missed their rent. You give him names, but you also remind him that one of them, Emma, widow of the Thatcher, has 4 children and no ox, that she delivered baskets of rushes to the manor herself last week. Edric grumbles, marks her name with a line instead, of a fine. The line means wait, it's not charity. It's common sense. The manor needs working people, not empty cottages, and you, quietly, are the one who helps keep that balance. No title, no thanks. Just ledgers and memory. You learn more over bread and broth than through any official decree. At the bakehouse, you wait as your own loaf is turned over in the coals. You listen as the miller's wife mutters about grain being mixed with sand. Someone's cheating. The flour's too coarse, you tuck that away. Later, you compare the mill's tally to the amount of grain submitted. Something doesn't match. You don't accuse. You mention it to the steward. The steward thanks you with half a boiled egg and a nod. That's your reward. Information passed quietly. Some days, you're more detective than scribe. You follow the trail of a missing cow through hoofprints and gossip. It was last seen near the brook. A boy says he saw it tied near the woods. You find its hide being dried behind a barn. The owner swears it died of illness, but the meat's gone. Someone ate it and didn't report the death. Technically, a fine. But you weigh the truth. You see how thin his children are. You record it as lost to wolves. You are not here to punish. You are here to keep the flow moving. Grain to granary, rent to lord, labor to land. A disrupted village is bad for everyone. A ruined family means fallow land. Fallow land means lower totals in your next report. And that, more than anything, is frowned upon. The manor doesn't care how it happens, so long as the numbers stay steady. And those numbers, you've learned, are also about time. Each mark in your ledger is tied to a date, loosely, seasonally. There are no precise calendars here. No one knows when Easter will fall until the priest declares it. But people remember debts by festivals, owed since last Lammas, 2 hens due after Michaelmas, half a pig promised by Whitsuntide. You adjust your records to fit. You learn the rhythm of the church bell, the harvest moon, the spring thaw. Your bookkeeping flows with the seasons, not against them, and so does your writing. Each day, you scratch new lines into parchment. You cut quills by candlelight. You clean your ink pot with brine. You dry scrolls near the fire carefully so they don't curl. You blot mistakes with ashes. Your writing isn't beautiful. It's readable. That's enough. Your figures align. Your names are spelled as they sound. And you include the details no one else would. Hen missing 1 foot. Grain delivered damp. Goose refused to be weighed. Bit steward. Small notes. But they matter. Because when the steward visits or the Lord's man arrives from London with clean hands and softer shoes, and they read your records, they see the truth of this place, not just in what was paid, but in how. It is then sometimes that they listen. One summer a higher tax is demanded. You protest, quietly. You present figures. You show grain yields are down. Rain was late. Pigs died of fever. You show the deaths, not just on scrolls, but by walking them past the empty pens, the abandoned huts. You speak softly, but they listen. The tax is lowered. No one thanks you, but no one starves that winter either. So you write, and walk, and measure, and listen. You become a map of the village, not the land, but the people. And you begin to wonder. When you are gone, who will remember the lives hidden between these numbers? By now your fingers are always stained, not just with ink, but with flour, soot, hay dust, and the dark residue left from hours handling cured parchment and the grease of candle wax. Years have passed in this village, quietly, as they always do. You are older now. A few more lines on your face. Your eyes squint longer at the scrolls. Your back stiffens when you kneel to weigh the grain. But your boots still carry you from cottage to cottage, and your cloak still carries the small ledger, a growing stack of skins tied with cord, thick as a folded blanket. It is still the same rhythm. Bell, bread, tally, walk. But something has changed. The village is not frozen in time. The children you once saw hiding behind barrels now speak to you plainly. The blacksmith's son now runs the forge, a widow remarried, a barn rebuilt, a new calf born, and your ledger reflects this too. In the earlier scrolls, the names were simple. John, Emma, Thomas. Now beside those names you have added others. John's son, the baker. Emma's daughter married to the cooper. It is not just tax you are tracking, it is succession. Legacy. You are, perhaps without realizing it, writing a family tree, one line of ink at a time. But lately you've started asking questions no one seems prepared to answer. What happens to the ledgers when you're gone? Who reads them? Who keeps them? You once asked the steward. He shrugged. Said they're stored in the manor archive or burned when they rot. Useful for a time, then forgotten. You didn't argue, but it bothered you more than it should have because you know how much is buried in those pages. You know that 2 bushels of barley late by a week meant that someone's mother died and they had to walk 3 villages over to fetch her burial cloth. That 1 goat, lame, refused at weighing, belonged to a boy who carved its hooves with a stone knife, sobbing into its fur. The ledgers hold more than numbers. They hold the rhythm of lives, the weight of hunger after a bad harvest, the quiet pride in paying a full tithe for the first time, the unspoken shame of debt, written in smaller script so it might not stand out. You remember it all. But will anyone? Else there is talk now of new officials being appointed, men with different accents, one from the city, one from across the sea. They write in cleaner Latin. They talk about reforms, coin-only taxes, royal censuses, ledgers bound with proper stitching. You are not against it, but you worry. Will they know that in this village people give eggs before dawn because that's when the hens are calm? Will they understand why John the Miller is always late? Because his daughter is blind and he guides her to the field each morning. Will they know that pigs here prefer turnip tops, not cabbage, and that this winter turnips failed? Will they write that down? One evening you return home and unroll the oldest scroll, the very first you wrote when you arrived here. The ink has faded. The parchment has stiffened. Your writing looks hesitant, younger. The names on it are mostly gone now, dead or moved, or forgotten. But you read them aloud anyway, slowly like a poem. Gareth of the riverbank, 4 sheep. Agnes, 1 hen paid in tears. Stephen, a fine of wool for drunkenness. Margaret, rent paid with a broken cart axle and a prayer. You run your fingers down the lines. Each one a life. Each line a moment that mattered. And in that moment you realize, this is not just your record. It is your life's work. You are not a knight. You are not a priest. You've taken no lives. You've performed no miracles. But you have witnessed the slow, stubborn persistence of a village that wakes each day and does what it must. You've tracked it in ink and memory. And now as the manor sends word that a new man will take your place, you pack your scrolls. Not to hand them over, but to preserve them. You build a small chest, lined with linen. You place each scroll inside, wrapped in old wool. You take the time to add 1 more, your own ledger, name unknown by most. Occupation, recorder of lives, duties too many to list, memories all accounted for. Paid in bread and silence and the weight of knowing, you seal it, you bury it near the oak tree by the river. No marker, just earth and time, because you know the truth, someone else will come. They will write in cleaner script, they will use better tools, but they won't know the people like you did. Not really. And maybe, just maybe, in 100 years, someone digging by the river will find your box, unroll a scroll, read the names and wonder, who wrote this, why did they care so much? And perhaps they will understand what you always knew. Even the smallest life measured in eggs and barley and goats deserves to be remembered. The sun is relentless, not in the dramatic way that poets describe, but in the slow, steady way that turns skin to leather and breath to sand. The kind of heat that doesn't burn. It bakes. You are walking again, Roman legionary, deep in the provinces far from Rome. The year is 112 CE. You've lost count of the miles. The march is slow but constant, 8 hours, sometimes 10. The centurion doesn't shout anymore. He doesn't have to. The rhythm of the feet is its own command, but what you think about most, more than food, more than home, is your shoes. They are your life on the road. Your barrier between flesh and the brutal Roman roads, the dust, the gravel, the biting stones that don't care if your empire is eternal. They are the caligae, the open-toed military sandals made from layers of leather, thick soles and iron, hobnails hammered into the base, and they are worn out. You are not alone in this problem. Every soldier on this road has the same trouble, the same blisters, the same snapping straps, the same nails that come loose and fall into the dirt, one by one. 1,000 men walking, and at least half thinking about whether their left heel will make it to the next camp. Rome's roads were engineered with stone precision, But precision hurts when it meets thin leather and bone. So you stop, not by choice, but because you have to. The midsole has peeled away again. You can feel every sharp edge beneath your arch. In the shade of a poplar tree near the roadside, you sit. You pull the sandal off and inspect the damage. It's split. The hobnails are nearly gone. One strap is hanging by a thread. You've repaired this pair 5 times already. But a 6th time at you might do it. From your kit you pull the small pouch, rough linen stained from oil and grease. Inside are your soldiers' tools, not weapons, not anything glorious, just the things that actually keep you moving. An awl used for punching holes. Waxed thread, coarse but strong. A flat needle, sometimes heated before use. Spare leather straps cut from an old belt. A few extra hobnails stolen from a tentmate's unused pair. A pebble you use as a hammer. You work quickly. The others are already moving. Your century doesn't wait long. You punch holes where the strap has torn. You sew with fingers thick from sword training but nimble now out of necessity. Your needle slips twice. You press on. You sew directly through the sole, tightening the fit. It's ugly, but it holds. Then, the nails. Roman caligae were studded with small iron hobnails, not for traction as people think, but for durability. They spread the wear and tear. Without them, the soles would be gone in days, with them, maybe weeks. You press a new nail into the leather, hold it in place, and hammer it with your pebble. It's uneven. The stone cracks a little in your palm, but it sets. One by one, you replace the missing studs. You've done this enough to know the sound a good strike makes, dull and final, the sound of survival, and then you rise. The sandal is ugly now, not regulation, but it will carry you forward. One more day, one more mile. This is not a soldier's tale often told. The scrolls speak of battles and banners, of emperors and glories. But no scroll mentions the dozens of hours you've spent fixing shoes. No historian notes the time your foot bled because a strap broke in Germania's winter, or how you learned to cut new insoles from horsehide and stuff them into the gaps. But ask any legionary, any Miles Gregarious, a rank-and-file soldier, and he'll tell you, you're only as strong as your shoes. The average legionary marched around 20 miles a day. Some campaigns demanded 30, over gravel, over jagged stone, through forests, across deserts. And your pay? Not much. Not enough to afford new caligae every month. The army provided 1 pair, maybe 2 a year. The rest was up to you. In the evening at camp, there were no cobblers, just soldiers. You'd find a stone near the fire, tilt your sandal toward the light, and stitch in silence. It was common enough that commanders didn't even bother commenting. Some even praised men who could keep their boots whole longer than the others. An unspoken competition. Whose shoes lasted longest? The real secret, though, was grease. Tallow, rendered from animal fat, was rubbed into the leather to keep it supple. Without it, the sandals cracked. With it, they resisted water, mold, and stiffness. Soldiers carried a lump of it wrapped in cloth like gold. Some bartered with it. You once traded 2 spoons of grease for a half-day's help repairing a strap. Of course, not everyone cared for their caligae. Some new recruits let the strap snap, figuring they'd get a new pair from the quartermaster. But they learned fast. The quartermaster had none. And so they limped, or they cut strips from tents, or they bled. One man, a Gaul named Lucan, wrapped his sandals in cloth because he ran out of hobnails. It worked for a week. Then the cloth shredded, and he walked barefoot the next 5 miles until he could patch the soles with wood shavings and rope. He marched like that for 3 more days. No glory, just grit. There were tricks. Some men added sheep wool inside their soles in winter. Some carved arch supports from spare leather. One clever Spaniard molded a heel insert from beeswax and waxed linen. It melted later, of course, but it worked for a time. It's strange what lengths men will go to for their feet, and yet it made sense. Without your shoes, you didn't march. Without marching, you didn't fight. And if you didn't fight, someone else carried your pack, took your bread ration, and eventually, your job. And now, as you walk again, sandal repaired, foot still aching, you wonder, did Caesar ever fix his own shoes? You've made it to camp. The fire is crackling low, its smoke mixing with the smell of dried sweat, old leather, and boiled grains. Around you, men settle into their routines. Some mending tunics, others trading insults over dice games. But, as usual, your task waits quietly at your feet. The right sandal, the one you patched under the poplar tree, is holding, barely. But the left, it's coming apart at the front. The hobnails are worn flat, the leather cracked from days of marching under a blazing sun. Tomorrow's route cuts through gravel hills, the kind that split a soul like a knife. You won't be the only one fixing things tonight, because in the Roman army, a camp at rest was a camp at work. Roman military camps weren't just rows of tents and guards. They were miniature towns, organized, efficient, and buzzing with activity. And while soldiers trained, dug ditches, and carried burdens, they also made, built, repaired. This is where the unofficial cobblers of the Legion came in, not professional shoemakers. No one earned a title for it. But every century had one or two men with clever hands and patience for leatherwork. They kept their tools close and rarely lent them out. Some made a side practice of it, charging half a ration or a favor in return for patching someone's sandal or reshoeing a boot. You know them well. One of them, Gaius, is squatting near a torch now, sharpening an awl with a bit of river stone. His tent is always surrounded by scraps of hide, broken nails, and strange patterns scratched into bits of wood. He doesn't talk much, but he sews faster than most. You nod at him. He grunts and returns to his work. There are no official supplies for this. Replacement caligae are rare. What comes from the quartermaster is slow to arrive and poorly cut. So soldiers make do. Old leather from broken shields is repurposed. Frayed tent ropes become laces. Sometimes a dead comrade's boots are quietly claimed, reshaped, and made to fit. It's not shameful, it's practical. The dead don't march. Every Roman soldier knew nothing was wasted, especially not leather. Some camps even developed small bartering systems, what one might call an economy of need. You trade an extra belt strap for 2 nights' worth of linen thread. You hand over a spoonful of vinegar in exchange for a handful of hobnails. You offer to carry someone's pack if they'll help sew your torn sole. Money rarely changed hands, but favors did. The tools, too, became precious. An awl wasn't just a tool, it was a ticket to comfort. If you lost yours, you might have to punch holes with a sharpened bone or the tip of a dagger. Needles were sometimes handmade from bronze or stolen from civilian towns. The army supplied weapons. But repairs? That was your job. Even the grease, simple animal fat mixed with ash or pitch, was rationed informally among tent groups. If someone had family in a nearby province, they might receive proper tallow wrapped in oilskin. That soldier became temporarily rich. You remember once watching a centurion, an officer, clean-shaven, decorated, sit near the fire with a broken sandal, silently working the stitching himself. No one offered to help, not out of disrespect, but because even officers knew your feet were your own responsibility. Sometimes there were upgrades. Some men lined their caligae with wool or straw in colder provinces. Others folded double layers of leather at the heel for more cushion. A few had foreign designs copied from conquered lands, Gallic-style boots, high and strapped, or soft-soled Eastern styles worn inside tents. The caligae themselves, for all their fame, were a compromise. Designed to be breathable in hot climates, they left the toes exposed, terrible for cold, vulnerable in battle. But they dried fast. They were simple to make, and they worked, most of the time. But soldiers grew creative. You once saw a man stitch bronze coins into the heel for weight and shock absorption. Another used bark to stiffen a split sole. One genius lined the inside with shaved moss, cool in summer, insulating in winter. And still, it came down to the same thing. Survive the march. Repair as needed. Move forward. In one campaign, your cohort marched nearly 500 miles in less than a month. The sandals wore down faster than they could be patched. A few soldiers tied bark to their feet with vines. Others walked barefoot for short stints, resting their broken caligae over their shoulders like hunting kills. You remember thinking, this is not an army. It's a nation on its feet, because that's what Rome was at its heart. An empire of feet walking. Roads were built for marching. Cities were measured in days' walk. Orders were carried by couriers in sandals. Colonies were founded by veterans who had walked every inch of the empire. And every footstep was protected by a few thin layers of worn, greased, patched and repaired leather. It makes you wonder, did all this, Rome's glory, its reach, its myth, stand not on stone columns or golden temples, but on thousands of quietly stitched sandals? The next morning the march begins before the mist lifts from the fields. You're up with the first clang of the camp's tuba horn, pulling on your kit, tightening your belt, sliding on your repaired caligae with fingers still raw from last. Night sewing, they're stiff, uneven, but they hold. You fall into line. The usual rhythm takes over. 4 steps, breath, 4 steps, shift the shield. The world blurs into the back of the soldier in front of you, and the sound of marching leather fills the air like a slow drumbeat. It's strange to think that one of Rome's most powerful legacies was not just its armies, or its laws, or even its roads, but the very act of moving. Marching was the lifeblood of the empire, not just for war but for peace. Soldiers built the roads they marched on. They surveyed land. They carried messages, guarded trade caravans, and escorted governors. They connected the pulse of Rome to the far edges of Britannia, Dacia, and Arabia. And every footstep counted. An average Roman soldier walked more in a year than many civilians did in 5, and not aimlessly. Their movements were recorded, mapped, justified. Entire campaigns were timed based on how long it would take a column of marching men to reach a certain riverbank or mountain pass or enemy fort. And it wasn't just soldiers. Messengers, cursus publicus, ran from post to post in sandals reinforced with extra hobnails. Surveyors mapped provinces in boots stuffed with wool. Traders walked beside their mules. Priests visited shrines on dusty feet. Even Roman citizens marked distance in milestones, one for every 1,000 paces. Rome, for all its grandeur, was a walking civilization, and shoes made that possible. At forts like Vindolanda in northern Britannia, archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of shoes, tiny child-sized ones, elegant civilian models, and most striking of all, piles of military sandals. Some still have their hobnails. Some bear the marks of hasty repairs. New straps added, holes punched roughly, soles patched with extra layers. One shoe even has graffiti inside, a soldier's name scratched into the leather, maybe to keep others from stealing it. Maybe just to say, I was here. You think of that now as the sun rises higher and the road curves east. Your feet ache. One of the hobnails is already coming loose again. You'll fix it tonight, again. Just like always. But now for a moment you allow your thoughts to drift. What will the future know of you, not your name? That won't last, not your battles. There were none worth writing down. But maybe, just maybe, they'll find your sandal. Buried in a collapsed fort or a dry trench, still stained with sweat, still showing where you stitched the leather too close, too tight. And maybe someone will wonder, who wore this? And the answer will be simple: a Roman soldier, one of many, who walked and walked and walked and stitched his way across history. Because, no matter how dull the detail, how ordinary the object, how boring the moment, even an empire is built from the bottom up, from the feet. It is just past midnight. The inn is half asleep. The embers in the hearth flicker low. And outside, under a quiet moon, the road waits. So do you. You are seated near the threshold of a coaching inn somewhere along the Great North Road in England. The year is 1773. You're not a guest. You're not nobility. You're not even expected. But you have something to send, a letter. And the mail coach has not yet arrived. And that's the way of things. Mail coaches, for all their promise of progress, rarely run on time. You shift in your seat. The bench is narrow, the cushion lumpy. A lantern swings slowly in the breeze, creaking. Beside you on the floor lies the thick leather pouch, your letter tucked inside, sandwiched between dozens of others bound for towns you've never seen. You wonder how long they'll all wait to be read. The world of 18th century mail travel is not fast. It is not romantic. It is not grand. It is cold. It is slow. It is deliberate. And yet it is vital. At the center of it all, the mail coach. A tall, top-heavy contraption pulled by 4 horses, driven by a man who smells of ale and leather, with eyes that haven't seen sleep in 2 days. It carries people sometimes, but more often it carries what truly matters. Letters, government documents, stamped parcels, small chests of coin, and everything runs on a fragile promise. Arrival. Coaches are scheduled with military precision on paper. London to York in 42 hours, Bath to Exeter in 30, but the paper forgets about fog, and mud, and bandits, and broken wheels, so the innkeepers know. So do you. You wait. The road outside stretches east, black with damp. It's been raining on and off for 3 days. The gravel is soft, the cart ruts deep. Somewhere out there is the coach, probably stopped at a toll gate, or mired in a village where the horses needed changing. Changing horses is everything. Each leg of the journey requires fresh animals, 4 of them, waiting, fed, harnessed. If one goes lame, the delay ripples backward and forward like a poorly written poem. And every delay means more letters late, more tempers short, and more pacing in candlelight. The inns, for their part, are half post office, half gossip exchange. The ostlers know what coaches are late before the postmaster does. A coach that hasn't arrived on time. They've heard. Everyone has. Word travels faster than the coach itself. You glance at the great ledger behind the counter, open, ink drying. A chart of comings and goings, scheduled departures and arrivals, all in neat script. It's a fiction mostly. The reality is messier. Coaches arrive in the middle of the night or not at all. Letters are misplaced, parcels dropped, dogs chew, corners, ink runs. Still somehow it works. Eventually mailbags are sealed with wax before departure. The seal matters. If it's broken on arrival, questions are asked, accusations made. Postal theft is a crime, sometimes punished as harshly. As highway robbery, it's no surprise. Letters carry secrets, affairs, banknotes, news of births and deaths. Some people receive mail with trembling hands, others never receive it at all. An envelope delayed is a wedding missed, a funeral arrived too late, and yet each letter must first be written, folded, waxed, addressed, carried in hand or cart to the coaching inn or receiving house, paid for, at times by weight, by distance, or by negotiation. Rates vary. Clarity is rare. You remember once sending a letter that returned 3 weeks later, unopened. A smudge had covered the town name. No one read it. No one tried. The ink had faded. Now you write your addresses in slow, thick strokes. You underline the town, you double-check the name. You fold the letter tight and tuck it deep in the pouch. Still, you worry, because letters get lost. Coaches are robbed. Bags fall into rivers. It happens. And if it doesn't, then begins the long chain of waiting. The coach arrives. The pouch is opened, letters sorted, carried again, by foot or by another cart, then handed to a boy, or a clerk, or a landlord, and then, perhaps, to the recipient, if they're home. If they care, if they still live. You sigh, the wind rattles the window pane, the lantern gutters, and then a sound, far off. Hooves, a rhythm, wet leather and iron on stone. You lean forward. There, at last, the mail coach. It is early morning in the year 1541. The light is soft and the dew still clings to the tall grasses. The air smells of damp wood, crushed thyme, and something sweet, something faintly floral and wild. You are standing outside a timber-framed cottage at the edge of a manor's garden. The door is open, the hearth already smouldering, and the bees are awake. This is the home of a Tudor beekeeper, not a gentleman. Not a farmer exactly, but someone essential, a keeper of hives, a steward of honey, a minor figure in the estate's roster, easily overlooked, until the sweet jars are needed for the kitchen, the wax needed for the chapel, the mead needed for the Lord's table. The beekeeper is already moving. She is middle-aged, with sleeves rolled, and her hands are permanently nicked from knives, nettles, and the occasional sting. She does not fear bees. She speaks to them. Low words, soft gestures. She moves slowly, deliberately, as if her bones are tied to the rhythms of the garden itself. You follow her behind the house where the hives sit, not boxes like you might expect. These are skeps, woven domes of straw like upside-down baskets, nestled on raised wooden stands. Some are covered with moss or old cloth, others are bare. They buzz quietly, each a self-contained world of wings and motion. There is no protective suit, no gloves. Just calm and a little smoke. The smoker is a clay bowl with a handful of dried herbs and damp wood chips inside. She lights it gently with a taper from the hearth, then waves the fragrant smoke around the nearest skep. The bees react, not with panic but with patience. The smoke masks the alarm pheromones, it slows them, makes them drowsy, just enough. She lifts the skep, carefully, slowly. She tilts it, revealing the dark comb inside, natural, tangled, golden. The bees crawl in slow loops, ignoring you, intent on their work. She hums a few notes under her breath, and with a hooked knife begins to trim. Not everything, just a section. Harvesting is a negotiation. Take too much, and the colony weakens. Too little, and the kitchen complains. It is a balancing act, taught, not in books but by watching year after year. The comb is placed in a wooden bowl lined with linen. The wax is dark, but the honey glistens already. She sets the skep back and turns to the next one. There are 9 skeps in all, some newer. One, ancient and brittle. She knows each one by the slope of its thatching, the color of its residence, the frequency of its hum. That one favors time, she says of the 4th. This one prefers clover. Bees are creatures of habit, like the people who tend them. Once the trimming is done, she carries the bowls inside. You follow into the workshop, a single, low-ceilinged room with thick oak beams and a work table worn smooth from decades of use. There are pots everywhere, clay jars, wooden tubs, lidded crocks marked with wax seals, some for honey, some for wax. Some for scraps, the word she uses for the unfiltered residue of the harvest. She begins to crush the comb by hand. No machines here, just strength and cloth. The comb is pressed into the linen. The honey oozes out slowly, like sunlight, melting. It smells warm, thick, rich with the scent of summer. Once enough is gathered, it is poured into small amphorae, sealed with beeswax and linen string, then marked with charcoal symbols for flavor and season. Early blossom, woodland, thistle sweet, a shorthand no one else can read but her. The wax, meanwhile, is saved. It will be melted later, strained through linen, poured into molds, some to make tapers, some to seal letters, some sold to the monastery for use in shrines. The cleanest wax fetches the best price. None of this work is fast, but all of it is essential. Honey is medicine, food, preservative. It sweetens the Lord's mead. It soothes the throat of the midwife. It glazes the roast in the manor kitchen. It is rubbed on wounds, mixed with vinegar, given by spoonfuls to the old and the sick. A jar of honey is a kind of magic. And the bees, their labor is unnoticed, their value immeasurable. She pauses to show you a beeswax tablet she uses to record her harvests. Not in words, but in small carved shapes. Dots for jars, slashes for combs, circles for full hives. An ancient system. Simple. Enough to remember. Behind her on a shelf are tools, a small wooden knife, a woven brush, a horn spoon, a gourd used to drip smoke, and a series of beeswax molds shaped like saints, pressed from old pilgrimage tokens. She casts them each spring to sell at the village fair. They're popular with children, not for prayers, for chewing. Outside, the bees continue. They do not care for harvests or taxes or religion. They fly their mapped paths from flower to flower, tireless, precise. She knows them better than she knows most people, knows which ones sting and which do not, which fly wide and which circle close. You glance again at the skeps in the sun. Whole world in each one, and you begin to wonder what happens when winter comes and the bees fall silent. The leaves are fading now. Yellow, rust and brown drift down the narrow garden path as the season shifts, slow but inevitable. The warmth is retreating. The garden is quieter. The air is sharper. It's autumn in Tudor England, and the bees are changing. Their flights are shorter. They linger less on the blossoms. They return faster to the skeps, their movements more deliberate. Inside the hives, the queen has slowed her laying. The workers are tightening the comb, sealing it, preparing. Because winter is coming and the beekeeper must prepare too. You return to the workshop just as she is hauling a basket of dry moss through the rear door. Today's task: insulation. The hives, woven straw, porous and light, are too thin to protect against frost. So she stuffs moss between the skep and its wooden shelter. She presses it firmly around the base, the top, and under the cloth wrapping that shields the entrance. "This one's early," she mutters. "The bees are sluggish already." She listens, not with her ear, but with her hand. Palm flat against the skep's side, she waits, feels a warmth, a hum, a subtle vibration. Not sound exactly, but life. If the hum is strong, the hive will survive. If it's too faint, they won't make it past February. It's as simple as that. No thermometer, no numbers, just instinct. Learned from years of watching bees live, and sometimes fail. She walks between the hives, testing each one. 3 are strong, 1 is uncertain, 1, her favorite, is almost silent. She frowns. But nothing can be done yet. "You don't feed them too early," she says. "They'll grow lazy, forget their work." Feeding bees over winter was possible, but risky. The sweet syrup used for supplementing their stores could mold, spill, distract the bees. It had to be done just right. And not until frost threatened. For real. For now, she focuses on sealing gaps. She smears wax mixed with ash across the base of a cracked skep, wraps another in thick cloth dipped in tallow. She marks each one with a charcoal X, depending on how well she expects it to fare. The bees, for their part, are mostly inside, no longer flying wide. They cluster tightly around the queen, bodies vibrating gently to keep the hive warm. It is said that a winter hive could reach temperatures higher than the air outside by sheer movement alone. They shiver in place to survive. And the beekeeper? She waits. There is little to do in winter, but much to remember. She turns to her small wooden tablet, the same one marked with dots and lines, and begins a new row, 5 skeps. 3 strong, 1 weak, 1 doubtful. She adds a small cross next to the doubtful one. A reminder. She'll check it more often. Then she prepares the wax. The honey harvest is long over, but the wax remains. Scraps are melted slowly over the hearth, strained through coarse linen and poured into clay molds. Some become tapers, others charms, all of it useful, all of it quietly necessary. The workshop smells of smoke and sweetness. Warmth clings to the air. But outside, the frost is creeping closer. She speaks of what happens when a hive fails. Sometimes the bees simply die. Starved, cold, gone. Other times the hive is robbed by wasps or other bees. A desperate hive may break into a weaker one and steal its honey. Chaos ensues. The beekeeper finds wax torn open, dead workers scattered like black seeds across the ground. Nothing can be done. There is no ceremony for the dead hive, no mourning, just silence, and then cleaning, and waiting for spring. Still, she tries. Every winter, every year, you help her finish wrapping the last skep. Your fingers are cold now even. Through your gloves, her hands are bare. She doesn't mind. She says the cold keeps her sharp. At dusk, she lights a tallow candle and sets it near the window. Not for light, she explains, for the bees. They remember it, she says softly. Come spring, they fly toward the warm places. This helps. You're not sure if it's true, but it feels like it could be. Inside, the hives are quiet now. Sealed, insulated, protected. And outside, the frost settles on the straw like a veil. The bees sleep. The honey waits. The wax cools in its molds. And you begin to wonder, In a world so loud with kings and wars and thunder, who remembers the hands that helped the bees survive? The air has changed. It carries warmth again. Soft yellow light stretching longer each day, coaxing the first green shoots from the hedgerows and trembling buds from the trees. It's spring now, and the bees are stirring. You return to the garden, with the beekeeper, walking slowly beneath the bare-limbed plum trees that are just beginning to flower. It's been many weeks since you first felt the buzz of the hive beneath your hand. Since you helped wrap the skeps in moss and waxen cloth, now that cloth is peeled away, carefully, gently. The beekeeper checks each hive with the same quiet ritual, one palm flat to the straw, listening not with ears, but with the stillness of someone who understands waiting. One skep is cold, still, collapsed in on itself, but the others, you hear it too at last, a rising hum, not a roar. Not yet, but a vibration, steady and deep, like the quiet ticking of a well-made clock. The hive lives. Inside, the bees have begun to move again. The cluster is breaking. The queen will start to lay. The workers will stretch their wings. Soon they'll leave the hive in short flights, testing the air, mapping the early blossoms, remembering the sun. The beekeeper smiles faintly and lifts her basket. Time to feed. This is the most delicate part of the season. Not the coldest weeks of January, but the brittle hinge between winter and full spring. When bees are hungry, but flowers still scarce. When honey stores are thin and missteps are costly. She spoons out a thick paste made of crushed comb and syrup and places it on a flat stone outside the hive. The bees will find it, they always do. They need a little help this year, she says. More to herself than to you, she moves to the next hive. This one is stronger. The hum is louder. She nods and marks the wooden post beside it with a notch from her knife. The skep that failed. She doesn't open it yet. Instead, she gathers the comb from last autumn, the broken pieces not used for wax or candles. She crushes them again, collects the scraps. The wax will be rendered one final time. The honey, if any remains, fed to the weak hives. Nothing wasted. By mid-morning, the garden is alive again. Snowdrops bloom near the fence. Bees dart from skep to hedge, slow and purposeful, returning with faint flecks of pollen. They wobble in, the air adjusting, remembering. The hive is not just a structure, it is a memory. And they are returning to it. Inside the workshop, the air smells of smoke and lavender oil. The beekeeper unwraps one of the wax tablets from winter. The notches she made, slashes, dots, loops, tell the story of last season. Which hives thrived, which ones didn't. She takes her knife and adds a new line. Spring has begun, later she prepares a new mold. This one carved by her father, an old honeybee surrounded by flowers. She pours the melted wax into it carefully. It will cool overnight, then be taken to the church to light for St. Ambrose, patron of beekeepers. The ritual isn't religious, not exactly. It's older than that. It's habit, respect, continuity. By evening, the first swarm call has reached her ears, news from a nearby village that a hive split too early. A wild swarm now hangs from an ash tree, buzzing like a golden cloak. She'll collect it tomorrow. That's how it works. Hives rise and fall, colonies move and return, bees die and are reborn by the thousands. The beekeeper remains. She does not chase them. She waits. She listens. She knows that tending bees is not a task. It's a rhythm. One you live by, one that never truly ends. That night, you step outside once more and listen. The air is still, cool, and somewhere in the dark garden, a hive hums softly beneath the stars. And you wonder, in all the old jars, in all the candles, in every sweet loaf and every wedding cup raised with mead, how many lives depended on the quiet labor of bees and the even quieter work of the one who kept them. The sun is just beginning to warm the rooftops of baked clay. You are walking through the narrow streets of Babylon. one of the oldest cities ever built by human hands. The year is somewhere near 1800 BCE. There are no clocks, no glass windows, no coins in your pocket. But the world is busy already. Vendors shout from shaded stalls. Oxen pull carts across worn stone roads. The Euphrates flows slowly beyond the city wall, its water brown but vital. You pass by scribes, weavers, children, and a group of men unloading baskets of dates. And then a scent, unexpected, soft, earthy. You've arrived at a bathing house, not the kind with marble floors or gilded fountains. This is a modest courtyard, behind a home of a wealthy merchant. Inside there is a stone basin, a shelf of clay jugs, and beside it, a small pot sealed with linen and twine. You know what it contains. Soap, but not the soap you know. This is not white, floral, wrapped in paper. This is brown, grainy, sharp-smelling, made from ashes and fat and oil. Expensive, handmade, rare. Because in ancient Babylon, cleanliness was not every day. It was exceptional. You watch as the washing ritual begins. A man kneels beside the basin, pouring a jar of cool water over his hands, then another over his shoulders. He dips a cloth into the pot of soap, just a little, and begins scrubbing his arms, his chest, behind his ears. The smell is strong, not unpleasant, but herbal, astringent. The soap is made from wood ash and animal fat, boiled with water and left to cure. Sometimes olive oil is added if the family is wealthy. Sometimes crushed herbs, coriander, juniper, or sweet rush. But always, it is handmade. There are no markets full of soap, no shelves of bars. To clean the body with this is a mark of status. In fact, many Babylonians clean themselves without soap entirely. Most rely on water alone, or sand, or gentle scraping with reeds. Some add clay to the skin, then rinse it away. Others use pumice or stones. The idea of cleansing the skin is not universal, it is ritual. Reserved for priests, merchants, scribes, or the upper tier of craftsmen. To most, soap is not a necessity. It is preparation, especially before a temple visit, because in Babylon bathing is often spiritual. The priests of the temples, especially those of Ishtar and Marduk, follow strict hygiene rituals. They wash daily, sometimes multiple times. They shave their heads, oil their skin, and clean their garments in carefully filtered river water. Dirt is considered impure. Smell is meaningful. Soap is used only after ritual abstinence, before sacred rites, or in rare medicinal cases. You follow the man as he finishes. He dries himself with a cloth of loosely woven flax. He then pours a bit of scented oil into his palm, pressed from sesame or palm fruit, and rubs it across his arms. It glistens briefly, then soaks into the skin. There is no towel rack, no mirror, only a small polished bronze dish, slightly warped, catching his reflection in a way that makes him look both present and distant. He sets the soap pot aside and ties the linen shut again. It will last another few weeks, maybe. It must be kept dry, cool, away from insects. He is fortunate. Most in Babylon never touch soap at all. For the common potter, the fishmonger, or the date picker, cleansing means rinsing with canal water. Quick, practical, no ceremony. The canals are everywhere, but they're not clean. They're used for washing, cooking, draining waste, watering animals. Still, they're better than nothing. Once a week, maybe on market day, someone might scrape clay from their arms, pour 2 jugs over their head, and change into their second-best tunic, if they have one. But real washing with soap? That is for the elite. And yet, even the poorest people understand its power. There is a Sumerian tablet, old even by Babylonian standards, that describes the making of soap from oil and ashes. It mentions the divine purification of the flesh. Another tablet offers a prescription, soap mixed with cedar oil to treat skin rash. It is healing. It is sacred. It is rare. Inside the bathing house you see clay jars labeled in cuneiform: oil, fat, ashes, scent. A young servant is stirring a pot slowly over coals. He is not making stew, he is making soap, his master's stock running low. It Takes hours, it must be watched. The mixture thickens, darkens. He tests it with a reed, still too soft. When it is ready, it will be poured into a shallow dish and dried for days, maybe weeks. Then cut into chunks, then stored. It is not sold. Publicly, it is handed down, traded among households. Given as gifts, sometimes it is buried with the dead, wrapped in cloth placed near the feet. Not for use in the afterlife, but as a sign of care. Outside, the streets grow louder, but inside, the soap cools. And you begin to wonder, how many small, careful acts like this, washing, oiling, tending, held ancient cities together day by day? The morning is warmer now. Babylon hums, shutters open, markets fill. Scribes take their seats in shadowed doorways, and from somewhere deep in the temple district, bells begin to ring, slow, steady chimes, marking a new phase of the day. You're walking toward the great temple of Ishtar now, tall and tiered, the steps lined with worshippers and guards. The air smells of incense and dust. But beneath that, faintly, there's another scent, oil, herbs, and something sharp. Soap, but this is not common soap. It is temple soap, made only in small batches, reserved for the Shangu, the priesthood, and a few chosen initiates. The making of it is a kind of sacred art, guarded closely by temple servants and apothecaries. The ingredients are roughly the same, fat, ash, oil, but the proportions, the preparation, that's different. More care, more time, and the addition of something rare, cedarwood oil. In Babylon, cedar is holy, imported at great cost from the mountains. To the west, its scent is said to ward off sickness, drive away evil, and prepare the body for contact with the divine. When it's added to soap, the result is sharp, earthy, and utterly distinctive. The temple uses this soap for purification, not for dirt, but for meaning. Before a priest may offer sacrifice, they must be washed. Not in river water, but in clean, filtered jars pulled from a well beneath the temple itself. The soap is rubbed along the arms, the hands, the back of the neck, the soles of the feet. It is not a private act. It is performed by another priest, in silence, as a ritual. Cleanliness here is not vanity. It is obligation. The same applies to objects. Stone idols are bathed in water and oil, rubbed with soap, wrapped in cloth, and stored in sanctuaries when not in use. Instruments are washed, floors swept, altars scrubbed with clay. Impurity is a kind of imbalance. It must be corrected, washed away. Outside the temple walls, the same idea trickles downward, imperfectly but persistently. In the healer's quarter, a woman is mixing a poultice of ash, oil, and river clay. Not soap exactly, but a relative. She applies it to a boy's skin, where a rash spreads across his arm. The ash dries it, the oil soothes it, the clay draws it out. She explains. The body remembers what the water forgets. She teaches apprentices to mix different blends. Soap for wounds, soap for curses, soap for childbirth, each with its own ingredients, some with cedar, some with barley ash, some with crushed fig leaves. Most will never be used for washing in the modern sense. They're burned, buried, broken apart. Still, they are called soaps. back. At the bathing house, the soap made days ago has hardened. The servant slices it into uneven blocks. No mold is used. Each piece is shaped by hand, wrapped in cloth and sealed with twine. He places them into a lidded jar for storage. Another jar, emptier, is reserved for scented oils, myrrh, frankincense, juniper, lily, all of them expensive and desired, because scent is a language in Babylon. Cleanliness is not just about touch, it's about smell. A well-oiled body, fresh with cedar and soap, is a social message. It says, I am prepared, I am refined, I am sacred. You hear this echoed. In the market, a merchant praises his linen, washed in soap soft as temple cloth. A midwife tells a mother, the baby must smell of sesame and soap before visitors arrive. A scribe buys a jar of priest's powder, a blend of clay and ash rubbed into the skin like dry soap to protect against illness. Everywhere, the signs of this subtle system, and yet most people never see the inside of a temple bath, never handle cedar oil, never afford a jar of true soap. They make do. A potter's apprentice washes in a barrel of rainwater. A date farmer rinses in a canal. A fisherman scrapes his arms with sand, then wipes them on his tunic. The word clean means different things in different places, but in the quiet moments, before temple, before festival, before birth, soap appears. Small pots passed from hand to hand, wrapped in cloth, stored with care, rare, yes, but not unknown, and you begin to wonder. In a city of towering ziggurats and roaring canals, what carried more power, the roar of the crowd, or the quiet moment someone pressed soap into their palm and washed? It is dusk now in Babylon. The sky turns bronze. Above the rooftops, market stalls close, oil lamps flicker to life behind narrow windows, and from somewhere far down the canal, a reed flute plays, soft, meandering like water finding its path. You walk once more through the city, this time not toward the temple or the bathing house, but toward the edges, the old quarter where stone begins to give way to clay, where homes are smaller, older, worn smooth by generations of touch. Here too people wash, but differently. A young girl scrubs her feet with sand beside a cracked urn of water. Her grandmother, wrinkled, strong, patient, wipes her own hands with a cloth soaked in boiled barley water and mint. Their soap is not soap at all. It's a mixture of ash and ground olive pits. But it works, mostly. Inside their home, a single bar of true soap rests wrapped in linen, tucked deep in a wooden box. It's old, half used, but precious, passed down, not thrown away, too valuable to use without reason. This is what soap becomes for most people, not a daily utility, but a form of inheritance, a sign of care, a reminder of touch and time. And when it is used, it is for something important. The dying, for instance, must be washed. A respected elder lies still now, eyes closed, wrapped in linen. Before burial, he is washed by hand with warm water and softened soap, a mix of tallow and thyme, rubbed gently across his arms, his face, his feet, not for cleanliness, for dignity, for the afterlife. In Babylonian belief, the dead travel through the underworld, a place of shadows and dust. Arriving clean is considered a form of preparation. Soap, used rarely in life, is given freely at death. Sometimes, a sliver of soap is even buried with the body. Archaeologists, thousands of years later, have found residue in grave jars, traces of animal fat, ash, and resin. They might catalogue it as ritual paste. They might miss what it really was, soap. Not a product, not a luxury, a final kindness. Elsewhere in the city, a midwife prepares for a birth. She washes her hands with warm water, adds a pinch of burnt lime and soap scrapings, and rubs until the mixture coats her fingers. Her tools are simple: linen cloth, oil, and patience. She has only one bar of true soap, kept in a clay jar. She uses it only for the newborn's first bath. The baby arrives, slick and wailing. He is wrapped, swaddled, held. Then comes the washing, the yawl. Soap is dissolved in a bowl of warm water. The cloth dipped, wrung, passed gently over the baby's brow, chest, limbs. The scent is faint, clean, old. The cloth is rinsed and hung to dry. The soap returns to its jar. One birth, one sliver used, the rest saved for the next life to arrive, and so it continues. Season after season, ritual after ritual, soap is never abundant, but it is always remembered. The language of cuneiform includes many words for cleaning, but few for luxury. That's telling. Cleanliness was not about abundance. It was about order, about balance, about harmony between the body and the sacred. Soap in that world became something more than functional. It became symbolic. A line in a Sumerian hymn, older even than Babylon itself, reads, "May your hands be as smooth as the river, your skin as clean as cedarwood, your soul ready for the gods." It doesn't mention soap, but it's implied because the hands must be washed, the skin must be prepared, and somewhere someone had to make that soap. Even now, the city begins to sleep. The canal water stills. The night smells of dust and smoke and cooling oil, and in 100 tiny clay pots across kitchens and courtyards and temple stores, a bit of soap waits, to be used or not, but never forgotten. And you begin to wonder, when people look back at our own time with all our bars and bottles and bubbles, will they see luxury, or will they understand that even in Babylon, cleanliness wasn't about perfection, it was about care. The wood groans beneath your boots, the sails above you flap, lazily in the windless morning, casting uneven shadows across the deck. A gull circles overhead, squawking, waiting to scavenge, and from somewhere down below a sound emerges that chills every sailor to the bone, not the crash of waves, not the cry of man overboard, but something far worse. The creak of the ration barrel opening. You're aboard a naval ship in the early 1700s, during the height of Britain's maritime dominance. The sun is rising over the Atlantic. The air is heavy with tar, salt, mildew, and something sour. You're weeks into the voyage. Morale is low, and the cook is preparing breakfast, such as it is. You follow him below deck, down into the also called hardtack, or toothbreaker, or worm castle. It's a dry, dense cracker made of flour, water, and nothing else. No yeast, no oil, no joy. Baked until it resembles stone. Issued by the dozen. Stored for months, sometimes years. So hard that sailors dunk them in water, beer, or even stew just to soften the corners. And that's when the maggots float to the surface. You learn quickly not to look. If you stare too long at your biscuit, you'll find movement. Small worms, hatched from weevil eggs laid before baking. You brush them off or don't. Protein is protein, the officer once said so. Some sailors break their biscuits and sift out the bugs. Others bite through, jaws aching, pride intact. The newest crew members vomit. The old ones chew in silence. Then there's the beer, or what's left of it, issued daily in gallon rations, weak, cloudy, and stored in wooden casks that sweat in the heat. It ferments oddly, sometimes sour, sometimes flat. If the beer's gone, you get grog instead. Watered rum with a splash of lime, if you're lucky. Mostly watered rum, enough to keep you numb, not enough to make you forget. And water? It's stored in casks too, but after a few weeks at sea, it turns green. Slime gathers. You skim it off. The taste is like pond water filtered through rope. You drink it anyway because thirst is worse than disgust. The meat, the biscuit, the grog, the sour water, it's all designed to last. Not to nourish, not to delight, just to survive. And sometimes it doesn't even manage that. Scurvy is the true horror. A month into the voyage, men begin to complain of sore gums, then bruises, then teeth begin to fall out one by one. The doctor prescribes vinegar, or onion syrup, or prayers. There are no lemons. Not here. Not yet. Some captains know citrus works, others don't believe it, others simply can't afford it. Meanwhile, men rot slowly from the inside. The cook does his best. He boils the meat twice, he soaks the biscuit, he stirs in dried peas when they're available. Once he adds a carrot. It's a holiday, but the truth is clear, the rations are feared. They are not meals, they are obstacles. You wake wondering what you'll have to swallow next. The thought of food fills you with dread. Some sailors trade their biscuit for tobacco. Others hoard their grog until nightfall and drink it all at once, just to sleep through the taste of hunger. You remember one man who stored his meat ration under his hammock for later. Forgot it. Found it 2 days later, moving. Another swore. He saw the Virgin Mary in his biscuit. Turned out to be a cluster of mold and worms. Still the system continues. Ration, boil, serve, chew, regret, repeat. And you begin to wonder, if food is life, why does every bite taste like dying? Another week has passed. The horizon remains empty. No land, no birds, only sky and water, both vast and indifferent. The ship moves steadily, but your appetite does not. You've begun to eye your biscuit not as food, but as a challenge, a task, a test of will. This morning's portion was the same as yesterday's. 1 biscuit, 1 slab of salt pork, 1 ladle of split pea stew. Except the stew was more water than pea, and the pork came with a hair still stuck to it. No one mentions it, they just eat, because complaining doesn't change the ration, it changes nothing. Down in the galley, the cook opens another barrel, this time of cheese, a wheel wrapped in oilcloth and wax. At first there's hope, then the smell, sharp, sour, fungal. It's blue with mold, the edges slimy. The cook cuts away the outer layer and serves the inner. He calls it aged. The men call it the silent killer. Some refuse to eat it. Others, hungrier, scrape the green off with their belt knives and swallow. There's talk of rats in the flour stores. Someone found droppings near the sacks. Another says he saw something moving beneath the canvas cover, but reporting it would mean nothing. You still eat the bread it touched. You still sleep above the barrels it lives in. Rats are part of the crew. Sometimes sailors eat them. One man did during a storm delay. Caught a fat one behind the gun deck, skinned it, roasted it over a lantern, said it tasted like pigeon. We didn't believe him. But we envied the heat. Meanwhile, the salt meat becomes tougher each day. No matter how long it's boiled, it resists. You once saw the cook drop a chunk and forget it for an hour. When he returned, it was still bubbling, still intact. He called height naval rubber, served it anyway, and the biscuits, harder than ever. One man broke a tooth, spat blood onto the deck. The surgeon gave him a cloth and half a dram of rum. Nothing else to be done. You start to see the same complaints ripple through the crew, gums bleeding, limbs bruising for no reason, joints aching, skin turning pale. Scurvy. The word passes quietly. No one says it loud. Sailors treat it like a curse, as if naming it summons it. The older ones remember. They remember a voyage where 7 men died in 2 weeks, their mouths black, their breath foul, their legs stiff as boards. They remember the captain who refused to bring citrus, claiming it was superstition. They remember trying to chew dried orange peel from a merchant's trunk, anything to make the bleeding stop. This ship, like most, carries vinegar. That's the answer, officially. You receive a spoonful each morning. It does little. It stings your throat, makes your lips pucker, but it doesn't stop the bruises, doesn't stop the teeth from loosening. The younger sailors still trust the officers. They believe in the rations, the regulations, the barrels with red stamps. But the older ones know better. They remember the deception. Pickled cabbage labeled as fresh greens, flour mixed with chalk to stretch it, rum watered down beyond reason, salt pork resalted to cover the rot, biscuits stamped with the royal seal, yet baked 2 years ago. One sailor shows you a ration label burned into wood. HMS Pembroke, 1712. The voyage was in 1720. The food outlived the ship. And yet, no one revolts, because this is the sea, and the sea has rules. You eat what you are given. You learn to hoard scraps, to trade meat for grog, to boil biscuit into a mush and pretend it's porridge, to chew slowly, even when it hurts. Some grow. Creative. One sailor mixes his biscuit with grease and salt to form a crude dumpling. Another grinds it to powder, adds vinegar and calls it bread soup. A third simply eats less, saves half his ration for the next day, though the officers say it's forbidden. They say old food spoils. You want to laugh, everything is spoiled. At night, the hunger hums in your bones. Not sharp, but dull. A nagging, emptiness, a knowing. You lie in your hammock listening to the creak of timber, the distant splash of water, and the low groans of men dreaming of real food, roasted fowl, fresh apples, warm bread, A cup of water that doesn't taste of wood. You won't see any of it for months, and you begin to wonder, if the Empire sails on such rations, how did it last this long? The voyage continues. Weeks melt into months. The sea doesn't change, but the faces do. Sunburn, hollow cheeks, lost teeth, bandaged limbs, and eyes that flicker with the deep knowledge of hunger. Not starvation exactly, but something worse, chronic disappointment. A slow erosion of trust in what food is supposed to be. You wake each morning not wondering if the ship is intact, but whether the barrel of meat has gone fully rancid. Whether today's biscuit will crack your molar, whether the grog will burn going down. It's no longer fear, it's expectation, yet even now, sailors adapt. One man ferments a jar of raisins in secret, hidden beneath his hammock. He calls it gutter wine. It smells like vinegar and socks, but after 2 cups he laughs again. Another man dries orange peel from a stolen supply, then eats the strips slowly, 1 per day, like treasure. You don't ask where he got it. The ship's doctor does what he can. He suggests wiping the gums with vinegar-soaked cloth. He mixes flour with rum and lard to create a restorative paste. No one believes it works, but they pretend it helps. Placebo is still something. There is talk of mutiny, not against the officers, but against the food. The cook is cornered one evening after serving what looks like the same meat twice in a row. A hunk of pork that should have long been gone. The sailors accuse him of reboiling scraps. He denies it, then admits it. Then says, "What choice do I have?" And they nod, because there is none. You're at sea. You're part of the machine now. And the machine is built on the promise that whatever is in the barrel will keep you alive, even if it nearly kills you. But then, one morning, something changes. You dock. A small port in the Caribbean. Nothing grand, a place to resupply. The captain calls for citrus, lemons, limes, anything. A handful of barrels arrive. Not much, just enough. Each sailor receives a wedge, just one. You bite into it. It is the sharpest, brightest thing you've tasted in months. Your tongue stings, your eyes water. But for the first time in weeks, your mouth feels clean, alive. The bleeding stops, just a little. The bruises fade, slowly. Word spreads. The citrus worked, not fully, not immediately, but undeniably. The realization moves faster than the ship ever did. Soon captains begin demanding more. Surgeons write reports. Officers talk about naval health. And quietly, the balance begins to shift. The Empire starts to understand that food isn't just fuel, it's function. Years later, lemons become mandatory. Rations improve marginally. Dried fruit, sauerkraut, better meat packing, biscuit ovens built at port. But for now, you are still eating what's left in the old barrels. You return to sea. The lemon is a memory now, but a powerful one. And when the next barrel opens, and the meat shines with brine and regret, you smile grimly, because now you know you survived it. Not because the food sustained you, but because you endured it. That's the secret no textbook tells you. The air is damp, cold, alive with soot. You stand at the edge of a Victorian train platform, somewhere in northern England, circa 1864. The roof arches high above you in cast iron ribs, dripping faintly with last night's rain. Gas lamps flicker in their yellow glass globes, and the world smells like hot metal, coal smoke, and shoe polish. There's no train yet, only the anticipation of one, and around you the station breathes, not with voices, but with sounds. A boy drags a wicker cart across the bricks. A porter yells for clearance. A newspaper vendor slaps folded pages onto a wood counter. Somewhere far down the platform, a telegraph clicks faintly. And above it all, the soft hiss of a waiting steam engine, a kind of slow exhale as if the machine itself were alive. Victorian train stations weren't quiet places, but they weren't loud in the modern sense either. They hummed, they clacked, They echoed. Every surface, every object made its own sound. Shoes, for example. The echo of heels on stone, different for ladies than for men. Women's boots tapped, sharply, quickly. Men's leather soles clapped more slowly. And then the scratch of wooden canes, the scrape of luggage trunks, the whistle of a conductor's call. You can almost feel the vibrations under your feet. This is the age of timetables and telegrams. The railways are precise, but only just. Delays are frequent. Clocks are synchronized to railway time, not local church bells. You look up at the station's great dial, it reads 7:12, but how exact is it really? You sit on a cold bench, smoothed by hundreds of waiting passengers. The man next to you smokes a pipe. He nods, barely, doesn't speak. Most don't. The station is not for conversation, it's for transition. A place between places. The station. Master passes, keys jangling at his hip. His boots shine. His voice is loud. Sharp vowels and clipped orders shouted to the porters. You watch a red-capped boy rush past, pushing a handcart piled with sacks marked Bristol Mail. Behind you the ticket window opens. You hear the scratch of the nib against paper, the snap of the ticket stub being torn, the thud of the stamp. A woman accepts her slip with a gloved hand, says thank you, moves on. Another man counts coins, slowly, deliberately. The clerk says nothing. He's done this 1,000 times. Above all this, the station breathes in patterns, the sigh of released steam, the chirp of birds nesting in the rafters, the rustle of skirts brushing against wooden benches, the low moan of a trolley wheel that needs oil, the dull ka-thunk as a porter drops a case. These sounds are not recorded in newspapers. They are not written into history books. But they're what define the place. Even the silence has texture. A moment passes, brief, brittle, when everything quiets. No cart, no voice, no pipe clink, just the cold echo of a massive space holding its breath. And then, a whistle, far down. The track shrill and high trailing off into the rain. The train is arriving. The sound begins small, a metallic whir, a distant clatter. Then it grows, wheels screeching faintly, pistons pounding, steam bursting in thick gusts, and finally it pulls into the station with a roar that silences everything else. The brakes shriek, sparks fly, white clouds pour from the stack and vanish, into the rafters. Doors open, voices rise. You watch the passengers step off, businessmen in high collars, children clutching paper parcels, women adjusting veils. They do not linger. They move with purpose, toward cabs, carriages, or connecting lines. The platform grows noisy, then clears again, and now a different sound, unloading, crates, trunks, a stack of umbrellas. One cage, possibly birds. A porter hauls them with practiced grunt and rhythm, thump, drag, clank. It will repeat again in an hour. You realize as you sit on the bench that the sounds are a system, a kind of language, one you could learn if you had time. You know that 2 short whistles means ready to depart, that the click of the telegraph is slower when the lines are crowded, that the creak of the bench means someone sitting too far to one side, that the clang of the ticket window closing signals the train is about to leave, and you begin to wonder, if someone returned here 100 years later and stood where you stand now, would they hear any of it? Or would all these sounds, ordinary, forgotten, rhythmic, be gone? The train has pulled away now. Its wheels clattered into the distance, leaving behind only a thin smear of smoke in the rafters and a lingering smell of coal oil. The station is quieter, but not still. This is the lull. It happens between trains. The moment after the rush, when no one is arriving and no one is boarding. Just the slow sorting of what remains. A bench creaks. A porter mops the tiles. A pigeon flutters up to the iron beams overhead. Dust floats in a shaft of light from the high windows, and all around the sounds become subtle. The faint knock of a boot heel, the hush of a newspaper page turning, the distant clink of teaspoons in the refreshment room. You walk toward the waiting room. It's not grand, just a small chamber with stiff-backed chairs and dark wood paneling. There's a fire in the grate crackling gently, though the smoke sometimes drifts back into the room. A wall clock ticks softly, measured and loud. A woman hums as she sews. Her bag sits beside her feet, canvas, patched. You sit across from her. No one speaks. In Victorian stations, silence is etiquette. There is no music, no announcements echoing overhead. All information comes through posted notices, handbills, or the platform guards. You learn to listen, to observe, to read the rhythm of the place like a tide. The carriage doors make a distinctive sound when they shut, a firm metallic latch, always in sets of 2 or 3. You learn to recognize the groan of an overstuffed luggage trunk being forced onto the rack. You notice the difference between a coal tender rattling empty and one weighed down. Some of the passengers waiting are children, returning from school for the holidays. They fidget in silence, watched closely by governesses. One boy clutches a wooden toy, a train hand-carved. His fingers tap along the top, mimicking the sound of the real thing. Clack, clack, clack. It's surprisingly accurate. Beyond the waiting room is the telegraph office. You pause outside, listening. The soft tapping is endless, tiny messages flying. Along copper wire. It's not fast, but it's faster than any horse. A whole empire moves at that click. Sometimes the messages are mundane. Freight instructions, weather reports, missed connections. But occasionally there's something more urgent. News of a death, a military alert, a missing person. You watch a clerk decode a message slowly, his finger running along a strip of paper. He says nothing, hands the slip to a uniformed officer. They nod. Both walk away. No fanfare. Just motion. Further down, you pass a small post office window. Letters, stamped and bundled, are loaded into a sack by a bored-looking boy. The mail sack is tied shut with waxed cord, then marked with a brass seal. You hear the soft metal clink as he locks it. It's headed for Leeds. Next to the mailroom, a large board lists departures and arrivals. Not digital, not even mechanical. Just chalk. A porter climbs a short ladder and wipes off 10:40 to Manchester. He replaces it with 11:15 delayed. His chalk squeaks. Someone sighs behind you. The delay has changed nothing, but everyone adjusts. Some return to the waiting room. Others walk to the refreshment counter, where tea is poured from a heavy ceramic pot into cups that chip easily. The spoon taps the rim. The saucer rings when set down. Even refreshment has its sound. And then the footsteps return. New passengers. You hear them before you see them. Leather soles, heavier coats, more cases dragging along the tiles. Another train is coming. The signals outside shift with a clank. A bell rings, once, then twice. The platform guard calls out a warning. The station begins to wake again, slowly at first, then in rising tempo. There's no conductor shouting from a loudspeaker, only men in hats shouting names. York! Last call for York. And suddenly the bench is empty. The paper is folded, the tea left half-drunk, bags lifted, coats pulled tighter. The woman with the sewing case stands quietly, adjusts her gloves, and joins the line. You follow them. Out to the edge of the platform again. The sound returns. The thrum, the rattle, the hiss. You feel the steam on your face. The train arrives. A new set of stories begins, and you begin to wonder. If we remembered history, not by its names and dates, but by the sounds it left behind, what would we hear? Evening settles slowly over the station. The gas lamps have been lit, each with its own hiss and pop as the flame curls into the glass. The roof above is darker now, a great iron skeleton holding the last glimmer of day in its bones. And as the light fades, so do the sharp sounds. The sharpness becomes softness. Where boots once clacked crisply, now they shuffle. Where the ticket punch once snapped, now it barely whispers. The porter's whistle is the only sharpness left, a final call. Into the dusk, the train has gone. The last one for the evening. No more arrivals today, no more departures, just the slow clearing of the platform. You sit again on the bench. The same one from the morning, though now colder, quieter. The wood beneath you hums with a faint vibration. The memory of thousands of footsteps. It's not a bench, it's a record of waiting. Across from you, a cleaner pushes a broom, bristles scraping faintly over the grit, the pebbles, the lost buttons and ticket stubs. He hums a tune, old, familiar. The kind passed down from worker to worker, without ever being named. You wonder how many people ever listen to it, not the tune. The act of cleaning, the broom, the hum, the last sweep of the day, because this too is history. Not the train's grand arrival, but its aftermath. Not the invention of the railway, but the small, quiet lives lived beside it. You hear the night. Clerk counting keys behind the desk. 1, 2, 3. A door creaks, a latch clicks. He writes something, scratching ink onto a ledger with the kind of slowness only paper demands. You hear a dog bark distantly, then go quiet. You hear your own coat rustle as you shift slightly, the fabric brushing against the rough wool of the bench, and then you realize something strange. You've learned the station's voice. You can now tell the difference between the wheel of a luggage cart and a cleaner's bucket. The snap of a ticket versus the flap of a handbill. The click of a telegraph key versus the ring of the signal bell. You didn't mean to learn this, but it happened, like a language absorbed by immersion. And soon, this language will vanish. Time, the gas lamps will be replaced. The shoes will be rubber-soled. The whistles will be replaced by buzzers, then speakers. The benches will become plastic. The platforms will be tiled. The clocks will blink instead of tick. And no one will notice when the rhythm changes, because sound leaves no archive. There is no museum for the specific scrape of a trunk on Victorian floorboards, no recordings of the porter's muttered swears, no choir of departing boots echoing. In high-ceilinged halls, just memory, just imagination, just this. You close your eyes for a moment, listening not for the next train, but for the last trace of the one that already left. You picture a woman gathering her skirts, a boy tapping a carved toy, a clerk sliding a coin into a locked drawer. You remember the way steam filled your lungs, how the bench groaned when you first sat down. You remember not the journey, but the waiting, and you begin to wonder, in all our stories of the past, how many moments did we miss, not because they weren't important, but because they were too quiet? The bell has rung, not a loud bell, not the kind that summons townsfolk or marks war or death. This one is softer, deeper, a single low tone that settles into the thick stone walls of the abbey like dust. It is time to brew. You follow. The monk through a narrow archway, his feet silent on the flagstone floor. His robes brush the ground with a whisper. He carries no torch, he knows the way by memory. You descend 2 steps into a room that smells of damp grain, iron and boiled herbs. The brewery, or as it is sometimes called here in the 12th century, the warming house. The room is modest. No grand vats, no painted barrels, just large wooden tuns, some lined with lead, a pile of firewood stacked neatly in the corner, and a large cauldron already steaming gently over the fire. The heat is a welcome change from the chill of the cloister. The monk does not speak, nor do you. This is a silent order. Words are used sparingly. Communication is gestures, nods, the lift of an eyebrow, the tapping of a spoon against a barrel rim. The process begins. First, water. Drawn from the monastery's spring, filtered through clay and time, poured into the cauldron with care. The fire beneath it hisses, spits. The monk stokes it slowly. Then, the grain. Barley, mostly, grown in the abbey's own fields. It has been malted already, soaked, sprouted, dried. The grains are coarse, dusty, but sweet to the nose. He pours them into a sack, then into the tun. Water is ladled in. The mash begins. This is the most delicate part. The temperature must be just so, not boiling, not cold. The monk tests it with his wrist, then by dipping a carved wooden spoon and watching the flow. Too fast means too thin. Too slow means starch. You sit on a stool in the corner, silent as the room fills with the smell of malted grain and wood smoke. There is no conversation, Only movement. Another monk enters, carrying a small bundle of dried herbs, groot as it's called, a medieval blend of bog myrtle, yarrow and rosemary. Hops are not common yet. The bitterness of beer still comes from what the local fields provide. The herbs are added slowly, crushed by hand, stirred into the wort with a long paddle. Steam rises in thick coils. Everything is measured by sight, feel and ritual, not by weights or recipe books. This is not ale made for profit. It is ale made for the rule, because the rule of St. Benedict allows for beer within moderation. It is nourishment. It is safer than water. It is served with bread, 2 cups per day, maybe more for the sick or elderly. It is part of the rhythm of life. Work. Pray. Drink. Not for pleasure, but for stability. And yet, boredom still creeps in. The monk's hands are practiced, but his eyes wander. You see it. The brewing has no surprises. The grain is the same. The water is the same. The tons never change. Brewing is labor, but also ritual, and rituals become dull, even holy ones. You wonder how many times he has stirred this pot, how many barrels he has filled, how many sips of lukewarm ale he has swallowed without thinking. It is said that the average monk brewed several hundred gallons per year, all of it consumed within the walls, none of it sold. Beer was part of the monastic clock, just like prayer, and in that clock, the brewery was one of the few warm rooms, a place where monks rotated for duty, not by skill but by schedule. To stir, to boil, to clean, you hear a cask being tapped in the corner, an older brew fermented last month. The smell is sour, earthy, stronger than today's batch will be. The monk lifts a cup, dips it in, sips. He does not smile, but he nods, faintly acceptable. Later, the wort will be cooled in shallow trays, set outside under cloth in the abbey's shaded yard. Wild yeasts will find it. The air itself will do the final work. Fermentation is unseen, uncontrolled, slow, like much of life here. You watch the fire crackle beneath the cauldron and realize this is not just brewing, it is meditation, a way to pass hours that otherwise might stretch too long in silence. The boredom is real, but so is the purpose. Each stir of the spoon is a small rebellion against idleness, and you begin to wonder, when the monk drinks from his cup at supper, does he remember this exact batch, this exact fire, or do all the brews blur together like the prayers, like the days? The brewing is done for now. The mash has been drained. The wort, thick and cloudy, has cooled slowly beneath linen cloths. And now it's time for the transfer. You return to the brewery just as the first rays of daylight begin to pass through the small stained glass slit in the south wall. A faint beam of color lands on the floor, illuminating dust and the gentle clink of ladles against barrels. The monks work without speaking. A row of shallow clay trays has been cleaned. These were once used for cooling the wort outdoors in colder seasons. But this batch is different, an early spring brew. The nights are still cold and the air clean enough to allow wild fermentation. So, the trays remain useful. They pour the liquid in slowly. It glugs, thick and amber. Foam clings to the lip of the clay. The monk running the ladle wears thick gloves. His hands shake slightly, not from effort but from cold. He works slowly, but the rhythm is steady. Fill, rest, fill, rest. You look at the vessels arranged on the bench. Not the elegant oak barrels of later breweries, but heavy handmade casks sealed with wax, sometimes linen-stuffed gaps in the staves. Some leak faintly. Others have initials carved into them. MTBA, a few crosses scratched in the wood. Each barrel has a story. Not dramatic, just repeated. This one is used for feast day batches. That one was repaired after a frost split it. Another always. Seems to sour the ale, but no one throws it out. Everything in the room is repurposed, reused, remembered. Fermentation begins in silence. No bubbling pipes. No temperature gauges. No timers. Just the knowledge that if you leave the liquid in a certain barrel, in a certain corner of a certain room, it will change. Invisible yeast, always present in the air, will begin its work. It takes days, sometimes longer. During this time, the brewery is left quiet. The monks check the ale only briefly, lifting a cloth, sniffing, peering at the foam. They trust the air. They trust the process. What else can they do? Fermentation is patience made liquid, and in a monastery, patience is the highest currency. While the ale rests, the monks return to other duties. One mends shoes, another copies pages of a psalter by candlelight, another tends the goats. But always, the brewery is part of the cycle, a soft pulse beneath the day. The older monks remember faith. The final barrel is tapped. It's a cool morning and you can see your breath in the cloister as the monks prepare the refectory for the midday meal. No voices, only motions. The gentle knock of wooden mugs being set on the long table. The sweep. To have sand on the flagstone floor. The muffled creak of the old chest where table linens are kept. From the kitchen, steam curls through the doorway. Porridge, hard bread, a little cheese, and today, fresh ale. You watch as one of the younger brothers carries a stone jug in both hands, reverently as if it were the gospel itself. He walks carefully, eyes on the rim, the liquid inside sloshing gently with each step. This is the new batch, brewed 3 weeks ago, fermented in the warmest part of the brewery, transferred by hand, strained through linen, poured from tun to jug, no label, no date, no name. But the monk carrying it remembers. They all do. Because here, the beer is not just sustenance. It is memory. This batch was stirred during Lent, that one during the snowfall, another brewed on the day an old brother passed. They don't write these things down. They remember them in silence. You join them as they sit. No plates, just bowls. The mugs are filled one by one. The ale is a deep gold, faintly cloudy. It foams gently, you raise it. But no one drinks yet. First the blessing, spoken not by a priest but by the abbot. A quiet voice barely above a whisper, in Latin that slips between steam and breath. Benedic Domine nos et haec tua dona. Then the meal begins. You sip. It is warm, slightly bitter, a little sweet. It clings to the tongue in a way that demands no thought, but offers small comfort. It is not remarkable, but it is enough. You look around the table. The monks do not smile, nor frown. They chew slowly, sip when needed. Occasionally, a glance is exchanged, a nod, a shrug, but mostly they remain within themselves. It would be easy to call this boredom, but you begin to see it differently now. There is peace in the repetition. Even pride, because behind every sip is the memory of work, the soaking of barley, the hauling of water, the careful temperature kept over coals, the cloth strained by hand, the barrel checked at dawn. Behind every batch is a discipline that mirrors prayer, steady, daily, unseen. You remember a passage in the Rule of St. Benedict. Idleness is the enemy of the soul. Therefore, the brethren ought to be occupied at certain times in manual labor. Brewing is that labor, and boredom in this place is not a failure. It is a structure. The monks do not seek novelty. They seek consistency in prayer, in task, in carpe, because consistency builds trust. Trust in the silence, trust in the routine, trust in the idea that even the smallest, most forgettable thing, like a ladle of ale, can become a sacred act if done with care. You finish your mug, the meal. Hence the mugs are collected, rinsed with cold water, placed upside down on the drying rack. Tomorrow the same. In the brewery, the next batch begins. The fire will be lit again, the barley stirred, the cloth washed, the barrel sealed. No one will cheer, no one will complain, and that is the point. You step outside into the pale light. The abbey is quiet again. The only sound now is the distant ring of the chapel bell and the faint drip of morning dew from the eaves, and you begin to wonder, in an age that craves new flavors and fast results, what have we lost? By forgetting how to brew boredom into something sacred. The Nile has flooded. You can smell it in the air. Wet earth, crushed reeds, the green sharpness of water retreating after weeks of covering the land. The soil is dark now, rich, still soft to the touch. The farmers have begun to plant again. But long before that wheat can become flour, before flour becomes bread, someone must count. That someone is you, an accountant, a scribe, a man of ink. And numbers in the service of Pharaoh. You do not wear gold, you do not own land, you do not build monuments. But you are needed. Because Egypt, even now in the year 1295 BCE, runs not on mystery but on math. You sit beneath a stone awning just off the grain yard, a rolled sheet of papyrus on your lap. The sun hits the edge of the wall, casting a long shadow across the counting bench. Two workers are hauling baskets from a granary, baskets of barley, each bound with a reed tag marked in red ochre. You mark a line beside each load. Your reed pen scratches